I'm really pleased to be here, thank you. Apparently you guys recognise this. This is one of your horoscope magazines, and the book was reviewed in it in February. And at the end, this is because I've got a Leo on the midheaven, so I'm such a big head, you'll have to forgive me, I've just got to read this out. For those of you with a Leo midheaven, you know, you can just imagine how this feels. So it says at the end, the future in the stars is destined to be a classic, since it represents astrology at its best. That's me. Amazing. Chester-Lambert shows us how we are all connected, how our collective consciousness is evolving, and how the dwarf planets are important emerging archetypes in the 21st century. So thank you very much to L Horoscopes, and thank you for all coming, and thank you, America, and thank you, everybody, and it's all wonderful. So here we are for us to talk about the dwarf planets. When I first heard the IAU announcement in August 2006, that due to the fact that we had discovered the Kuiper Belt and that we had new planets, and I heard about the reclassification, I was absolutely electrified by this. For me, this was the greatest moment since Galileo first pointed his telescope up to Jupiter and discovered the moons. I recognised that such a huge discovery and such huge events astronomically were going to have big meaning astrologically as well. And similar happened in the 17th century. 1610, Galileo wrote Starry Messengers, which was his book about what he saw when he put his telescope up to the sky. And that century, there was also enormous transformation and evolution, huge leaps forward in technology. And the English Church, for instance, pulled away from Rome, the Catholic Church, and became the Republic of England, and great stuff happened. And I thought to myself, you know, apart from discovering Pluto, you know, we haven't had a great deal happen, such a big amount happening in the solar system since. And so I thought, no, this is just got to be good. So I started to look into the dwarf planets, and I studied the mythology of them, and I looked at the discovery stories around them, and I thought I'll write an article, and then I finished up writing another article, and the next thing you know, you're driving yourself mad because you're writing a book. Eventually it was published. So what we're going to do now then is we're just going to look at the discovery, what happened. So it was actually in California, in Paloma. Don't know how you say this. You'll all be laughing at my accent shortly. But they refurbished a big telescope there and digitalized it. And this meant that they were going to be able to look much further out into the solar system than they'd ever looked before. And it had always been theorized that there was a Kuiper Belt out there. Pluto was probably the first one. With Pluto being at such an angle to the ecliptic, it was always kind of like you know, that's weird, maybe there's some other stuff off the ecliptic. And so that's what they did. They looked off the ecliptic, and they found thousands of objects, hundreds and thousands of objects. Some just as small as rocks, lumps of ice, and some as big as planets. So I'm just going to move forward from that. And the interesting thing about the Kuiper Belt, and here we got a view from the side on, is that you can see how crazy this stuff is. This is not just off the ecliptic, this is off the ecliptic. This is like way stuff. I mean, it's like all over the place. So looking at it from out in space, looking back into the solar system, it would look like bees buzzing around. You know, this is like really unusual. You know, we're used to this kind of like, you know, the classical planets are also methodical. This caused a bit of a problem for the astronomers because these new discoveries, as they were piling in, meant that they had a problem with what to do with the school books. Do they write a new school book every time somebody discovers a new planet? It was a bit of a problem. They also, amazingly, had no definition for the term planet. No planets have been discovered, really, since Pluto. And so there was no need to have a definition. And so this was presenting the astronomers with all kinds of kind of like scratchy head issues. And so they sat down and decided that they were going to have to reclassify the solar system, because then they weren't going to have to keep rewriting the school books every time somebody discovered another planet. They could say, well, we have so many classical planets, and then the rest of the stuff is stuff that just changes. And so that's what they did. Right, I won't dwell on that. I'd actually got some, the lucky ones can have what's left of the handouts. I've got a few, and that's really just some statistics on the dwarf planets, which you won't be able to see from where you're sat, so, and it's not important anyway. So, the IAU announced then in August 2006 that the definition of the term planet would be: it must orbit a sun, it must be spherical, and it must have cleared its orbital path as everything around it merged or coalesced into this one lump. And then the definition for the term dwarf planet: it must orbit a sun, it must be spherical, and it has not cleared its orbit and revolves in a group with other objects. This actually gives us the first little inkling of what the meaning of the dwarfs might be about, because it's this having close neighbours. The dwarf planets are highly connected. They're difficult to discern. Because things are around them and there's lots of it, it gets a bit merged sometimes and it gets a bit difficult to see. It is not isolated and clear cut. And I think that's probably, looking at that, that's kind of like, just gives us a clue to them. Here we go with an artist's drawing of the solar system with the sun at the centre. The way I see the solar system myself is I see it as like a human being in its own right. It's a person. And so the solar system is made up of planets in the order in which a person needs them. So we have at the centre, we have our will, our ego, our sun, our driving force. And then we have Mercury out, the way we communicate. Venus, what we desire, what we find attractive, our value system. The Earth with the moon, so moon emotions. Then we have Mars, the driving force, the energy with which we get up in the morning, our assertiveness, our aggression. Then we have the asteroid belt with Ceres in it, which has been named a dwarf planet. And then after that we have Jupiter and Saturn. So Jupiter is about how we cope with expansion, how we cope with broadening our horizons. Saturn is how we cope with the limitations and the restrictions. And then we go into, obviously, the outer planets, which are much more universal energies, which kind of impinge on that person at the centre. So I kind of see the solar system as a model like that of a human being. What we've got then is something quite strange, because when the IAU announced that the dwarf planets were going to be a group in their own right, they said that Ceres from the asteroid belt is a dwarf planet, and Pluto is a dwarf planet, and at the time when they announced it, they said Charon, Pluto's moon, was also a dwarf planet. Now, in actual fact, it was discovered back in 1978 that Pluto has this big moon, Charon. It was actually an American naval astronomer who discovered it. They were sending a mission called the New Horizons mission out to the Kuiper Belt. So this guy was making some very detailed observations of Pluto, so they pointed the mission in the right place, which it missed. And anyway, as he watched Pluto, Pluto obligingly turned, slowly. So this guy is seeing a bump appear on the side of Pluto. Can you imagine this in 1978? There you are looking up at a planet, and slowly there's this huge bulge growing on the side of it, you know, like, I've got to take more water with it. Anyway, so this thing just gets brighter and brighter, and eventually Pluto is divided into two. So this guy keeps looking. And they realised that all this time there had been an enormous moon behind Pluto. And as it turned, suddenly we have Pluto's moon. What's interesting about this is how the moon got named, because Charon is actually Charon, who is the Greek mythological figure who takes the souls of the dead across the river, right? So he guides the soul to the underworld. The guy who discovered Charon had a wife called Charlene, and he was so proud of his wife Charlene, so he got to name Pluto's moon. So he wanted to call the moon Charon, but it must be pronounced Charon after his wife. So, okay, you get to discover a planet. I guess you get to do that. Anyway, so we've got Pluto, Charon, and then we've got Eris, Haumea, Maki Maki, and then way further out there we've got Sedna there. So everything past Neptune is clearly a TransNeptunian object. I often get asked, what's the difference between a Kuiper Belt object and a TransNeptunian object and a dwarf planet? So we're just going to sort that out first. So the dwarf planets have the definition that we looked at earlier. And the difference between the dwarf planets and the TransNeptunian objects is that the dwarf planets can be anywhere in the solar system. So they can be before Neptune. And in fact, Ceres from the asteroid belt is a dwarf planet. So the list of dwarf planets so far, and this will get added to, is Ceres, Pluto, Maki Maki, Haumea, and Eris. Now, TransNeptunian objects, obviously anything past Neptune, and so there's a whole pile of stuff that's TransNeptunian objects. I've put Ixion and Orcus in there because I intend to say something about them, even though they're not dwarf planets. But so Pluto, Maki Maki, Haumea, and Eris, they're TNOs and they're dwarf planets. So. Right, I just want to dwell for a moment on this issue of Ceres in the asteroid belt being a dwarf planet. For me, the asteroid belt, if we're going to put the whole asteroid belt in one tiny little nutshell, then I'm going to say that I think the asteroid belt is about process. All of those goddesses in there, so you've got Pallas Athena, Juno, Vesta, they are all about process. And it's the process of getting from Mars, where you have that highly individual, personal, archetypal energy at your disposal, to your ability to cope with expansion, new horizons, all the stuff that Jupiter represents. The asteroid belt assists us with that process. As humans, we are making a process beyond our basic to that which stretches us and grows us. So Ceres in that asteroid belt is one of those energies which is about process. But I also want you to remember this term process, because I'm actually going to refer to it a bit later on. There's a key feature here. Right. The definition of the term process. This is just taken from a dictionary. A series of natural developments which results in overall change or the natural growth of an organism. Okay. Interesting, this word asteroid, right? So, interestingly, asteroid. How cool. Nobody's ever seen that before, have they? I think that is just so amazing. And a steroid, in the same dictionary, is an organic compound that transforms. That is amazing. And that is very interesting because, well, you'll see why as we move forward. The asteroids are those energies which we require when we start to work on more sophisticated levels. When our psychological growth or individuation process wants to take us into higher and deeper consciousness. Now, the Kuiper Belt is also about a process, but this time the process is about a world and global and a collective consciousness. So we've got now a comparison between the processes which an individual makes metaphorically as symbolized by the asteroid belt, and then as we go through this talk, you'll get the hang of the idea that I'm talking about the Kuiper Belt is offering us another collection of another rocky belt, which offers process, but this time for the planet, much bigger levels. The Kuiper Belt represents the process of evolution of mankind. It offers creational process, evolutionary process, issues we must take on and deal with to progress into heaven knows where, a massive journey of a different kind that we're in the process of learning about, this huge shift that's happening at the moment. The Kuiper Belt is also about natural population controls, excesses and processes of mass consciousness. And it's also about the planetary processes of weather, earthquakes, tsunamis, La Niña, El Niño. So, right, I'm just going to go now to Ceres. Ceres, for those that don't know, is the Roman goddess who was kind of lifted from Demeter and before her Isis. So the information we have about Ceres or Demeter mythologically, we were left the hymn to Demeter, which is a fantastic hymn which tells us about this wonderful story of how the maid and the mother, Proserpina, if you like, or Persephone, were kind of walking through a meadow and picking flowers, and it was all very nice. And Pluto, the lord of the underworld, emerged from the underworld in his golden chariot, and he kidnapped Persephone, the maiden, and he raped her, and he took her down to his underworld, where he made her his queen, and she ruled the underworld with him. Now, this myth has all sorts of wonderful metaphors and psychological things you can understand about it. But one of the important things about it, in terms of what Ceres means now, is the actual rape and abduction of Persephone. We have to see the maid and the mother and the crone as quite an important process here, because they are actually emanations of each other. These are not separate people. What is represented here is the maid, the mother, and the crone as an emerging thing that comes, you go from maid to mother to old crone to maid to mother to old crone. Kind of like Russian dolls, when there's always another one inside. There's no kind of like cut off. It's like this whole process of maternal growth and evolution and just the constant cycle, really. So there we have a lovely image of how the daughter is being returned to the mother. The mother has been grieving. Now, a fact that is absolutely extraordinary for me, as far as I'm concerned, is, okay, so we have this myth of Demeter and Pluto, which ties them together quite well. I mean, they got married, effectively. But what was absolutely fascinating was in 2008, I'm sure it was, New Scientist, 19th of July 2008, we get told that Ceres and Pluto have a similar composition and origin. They're made of the same stuff. So in the formation of the solar system, Ceres and Pluto were part of the same thing, and in all that turmoil, Ceres was flung into the asteroid belt from out into the Kuiper Belt. That is absolutely staggering. There we have a myth which ties them together, and the next thing we have a report saying, well, actually, they used to be the same thing. So, so there she is in the underworld with Pluto out in the Kuiper Belt, and the next thing she's returning back to the asteroid belt. Oh, that is just so cool. So Ceres has a high proportion of ice to rock for an asteroid, but a close match to Pluto. She has some resonance also with other TNOs, but the closest match is actually with Pluto. When I wrote this then, they found out a lot more about it since. So she is an immigrant from the outer solar system. That's amazing. So just some stuff about Ceres there. Ceres represents for me the return of the great goddess. The wonderful thing about this big new discovery stuff is that a lot of it has been named after goddesses. And so for me, this rebalances the solar system, which was heavily patriarchal. Now we've got a rising of the goddess again. We've got lots of representations of goddess, and I think that's a good thing. Ceres encourages to think about being reconnected to Earth and Earth cycles. This is quite important. I think that one of the strong themes about the dwarf planets is about how we will hopefully reconnect with Mother Nature. The trouble with the monotheistic religions that have been that have dominated really spirituality, especially in Europe at least, for the last 2,000 years, is that they said that we should worship a single one God and not nature. And what I believe is that we will be moving into a spiritual paradigm which will encourage us to once again think about nature as having force, spirit, energy. Think about Mother Earth as having force, spirit, energy. Much more of an Eastern spiritual way of thinking than the monotheistic religions, which said, no, you shall worship a one God and you will not worship nature. And that really disconnected us from nature, I think. And I think we're kind of like on the Titanic heading towards the iceberg at the moment. And I think what we need to do really is kind of like, let's get the Titanic on a different path here. And reconnect to the Earth and start to be better caretakers of the planet, you know. Just get our husbandry a little more in line with what Mother Nature wants. Ceres is about crops, food supply. Worldwide crop shortages are predicted. Rising grain prices are certainly happening. Here's a staggering fact for you. We have to grow as much food in the next 50 years as we grew in the last 10,000. That is just staggering. Oh boy, we have got to do something about this. Ceres is about the grieving process and loss a lot. She's actually getting stronger in natal charts. So if you have a client in a grieving process, have a look at Ceres, actually. She's starting to really show herself in this respect. Parent-child separation and kidnap. We had a big story in England a while back, and I don't know if any of you have heard of this child, Madeleine McCann. Yeah. Right, well, Madeleine McCann, for those that don't know, was kidnapped. She was 4 years old. Her parents had gone, English parents had gone to Portugal. They'd put their twins and the daughter in a bedroom and gone across to where the bar was and had something to eat, got back to their room, and Madeleine had been kidnapped. I can't put a child's chart up, obviously, but what I can tell you is that Madeleine had a Sun-Ceres conjunction, 4 degrees apart. As the progressed sun got to her natal Ceres and was opposed by her progressed moon, she was kidnapped when it got within a minute. So she has a Sun-Ceres conjunction natally, 4 degrees apart. Yeah. So what happens then, if the sun's behind, it progresses to the natal Ceres, takes 4 years, 4 degrees. Her progressed moon had moved into opposition. And she was kidnapped as the whole thing went exact. So that pretty much kind of like tells us about Ceres, I think. I've put there some of the meanings of the dwarf planet. I'll read them out because I can understand that it might not be too clear for you to see. Obviously, we're doing I'm doing ongoing research to do with the dwarf planets. And this is what I've got so far with them, really. And Pluto's a dwarf planet, so who's going to argue with some of these? They turn things on their head, completely upside down. There is a strong theme of duality coming out. They imply that life has something hidden. What you see is not all there is. There is stuff underneath. Just as we're discovering dark energy and dark matter, and the Large Hadron Collider at CERN in Switzerland is looking for dark energy, dark matter. We're discovering that there is more to life underneath, that we are not made of solid stuff, we're made of spinning energy. The quantum world that supports us produces our cells and stuff, and none of it's solid. They put the microscope into the cell and then in the nucleus, and they haven't found a solid bit. Nothing's solid. There you go. They all press for extreme transformation. They are all innately concerned with creational evolutionary processes of mankind, Earth, global issues, planetary processes, weather, earthquakes, volcanoes, La Niña, El Niño, tsunamis. And they're also about population shifts, population inequalities, population excesses, the growing question of population numbers, of the population explosion, population feedback loops. At one point, does one of those kick in? This is where the dwarf planets takes us. And they take us to places where we ask questions that nobody wants to talk about because it's taboo. You know, like, what about birth control for the third world? You know, you get into places where, you know, it's just too kind of hot a potato to talk about it. But that's Pluto's world for you. Right. This is an interesting thing here. Down this side, that's 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. That is degrees from the ecliptic. Down the left side. Along the top, that is AUs from the sun. I'll just explain what an AU is. An AU is an astronomical unit, and an astronomical unit is measured by the distance from the sun to the Earth. That's 1 AU. So along the top there, we've got 10 AUs going up to 70 AUs. Right, so here we have orbits. So on the left-hand side, we have Saturn, and then we have Uranus. And I was just pointing out to a gentleman earlier who's asked me about Chiron. There you have the centaurs, with Chiron as the head centaur, down at the 20 to 30 degrees off the ecliptic mark. Then we have Neptune. And then we have everything trans-Neptune, but we also have the Kuiper Belt. The Kuiper Belt, the main body of the Kuiper Belt, as I've written here, is here. Those little dotty things, they're all planets. Now, this is where the astronomers have been, oh, thank you, astronomers. They have been an absolute godsend. Mike Brown, if he organised it, has done something quite amazing here. They've just handed us something on a plate as astrologers. Because what they said was, anything at 40 AUs there is going to be called a Plutino, because Pluto is there. So we've got, I've put there Orcus, Ixion and Pluto, because they're all there. And anything discovered in that area has got to be named after deities that belong to the underworld. So they've kind of gone, there's the underworld. Brilliant. And then the classical Kuiper Belt objects there, they've said that anything that is discovered in that area has got to be called after creational deities. So they've handed us this perfectly, you know, a lovely paradigm, you know, like a map. You know, there's your underworld, there's your creational stuff. Oh, thanks. And then out here, where there's just some odd stuff, which goes, I mean, if we look at the line there off the ecliptic, if I just do an imaginary line, see Eris there? Wow. You know, how many degrees is that? I think it's 44 or something. I put it too high, actually. So, and they're called scattered disk objects. Snow White is an unnamed large planet. She hasn't got a name yet. So, this is telling us an enormous amount about the planets that exist in these areas of the Kuiper Belt. Everything that is past Neptune has keywords that can be that are something like fundamental. Duality is a keyword for the TNOs. Hidden. Spiritual, as relating to a person's spirit rather than their material or their physical needs. So kind of like spiritual development, planetary spiritual development. invisible wisdom, gnosis, intelligence, power, omnipresence, survival, evolution, transformation, extreme. This is all words that can be used for the TNOs. So what I'm going to do now then is I'm just going to look at these different areas one at a time, just break that down and look at the planets in them so we can kind of get an idea of what's going on. Before I do that, I'll just explain one thing about Neptune. And I think this is staggering. This blew my mind when I found this out. And I've been working with it ever since, and it just takes you to very strange places. Neptune controls completely all of the planets in the Plutinos. Neptune's gravity completely controls Orcus, Ixion, and Pluto. They're in something called a 2-3 resonance, which means that for every orbit, every 2 orbits that the Plutinos make, Neptune makes 3. So 3 orbits of Neptune, 2 orbits of the Plutinos. And that is very tightly controlled by Neptune's mighty gravity. Now this takes you to all kinds of places as an astrologer, doesn't it really? Okay, so does God control the underworld? You just kind of like, you know, it's just like a strange place. I mean, there are some similarities between the influences of these two, but I think we have to think in terms, or think in new terms really, about stuff like that. For me, this has meaning because as far as I'm concerned, every single thing and the behavior of every single thing in the solar system has meaning. I do not believe that half the planets have keywords hanging off them and half of them don't mean anything. I believe that the solar system is a living, breathing thing, all connected up like a big web, and that everything in it, when it moves around, has meaning, and we can read that meaning. And that's a very important and key part of my work. So I look at the fact that the southern equatorial belt, for instance, on Jupiter, I don't know if you know those red bands that go around Jupiter. So last year, one disappeared. Poof, gone. The southern equatorial belt just went overnight. And it looked really weird. Because for a while, there's Jupiter with the northern red band, and there's not one on the south. So it looks like somebody's nicked his trousers or something. It's really amazing. I write a column for the Astrological Journal in England, which is our only, serious astrology magazine. If you're in the Astrological Association, you get a copy free, but you can buy one for £5. And you could actually have it ordered and have it delivered over here if you like. But I write a column for it. My column is the most controversial column in the whole magazine, and people always write furious things. Every time I write something, there's a whole pile of letters after, and the editor thinks this is so cool because nobody ever wrote in before. So he's always saying to me, just put what you like, Alison. Oh, no, even if you think it's really crazy, you just write it down. So in there I'm happily typing, and I think that the meaning of the missing southern equatorial belt of Jupiter is such, but that's me. I do think it has meaning, I think if something sneezes on Pluto, then something happens in that room next door. I really do. So, right, so the orbits of Pluto, Charon, thank you, American astronomer, Charon, and Orcus Vanth. Okay, first, this is supposed to be, I do try with my drawings, What I'm supposed to be indicating here is that that's the ecliptic with Jupiter, Uranus, Neptune. And what I'm trying to show is the angle at which Pluto, Charon orbit, and then the angle at which Orcus Vanth orbit. Now, Orcus is not a dwarf planet, but he's worth mentioning here because Melanie Reinhardt said so. And Melanie's a great friend of mine. I love her to pieces. But people do tend to jump up when Melanie Reinhardt says, that's important. Okay, that's important. And because she's very intuitive. She picked on Chiron when, nobody else would have. And she picked up on this TransNeptunian object, Orcus, and she said, there's something about this. We're having lunch, and she kept going on about whale song and clients coming up with whales and all this sort of stuff. And I'm going, okay. Anyway, so she says it's important, and she's got a couple of pages on her website actually about Orcus, and I think she's written some amazing stuff. What's interesting is when she was going on about this whale song and talking to these whales and stuff, it was about 2 years ago. And then just recently, lo and behold, so I don't know if you've read about it, but scientists have now discovered that they can decipher whale and dolphin noises, that they're collecting a kind of an alphabet, and they're able to talk back. And then, so there you go, you see, egg on face. Melon is always right. So I've put this planet in. Orcus was named by Mike Brown, who was the discoverer, an American astronomer here in California. And he then named Orcus's moon after an online naming competition on his website. And he wanted people to pick an Etruscan name because he said that Orcus, the name Orcus, came from Etrushka. Etrushka is a region of northern Italy and a fantastic race of people who preceded the Romans inhabited Etrushka. They came originally from around Turkey. And Mike Brown was entranced by the fact that these two were in this very strange kind of like symmetry. That Orcus Vanth were a binary planet because the moon is so big with Orcus Vanth that you've got two planets really. They orbit like there's a dumbbell between them, like there's a bar between them. They just stuck together. And the same with Pluto Charon. And so Mike Brown, bless him, named Orcus. Anyway, he said that it went on the IAU website, something about, this Etruscan, this, that, and the other. And he said that Orcus, he loved the idea of Orcus because he liked the idea of Orcus rising up to become this really evil, devilish Hades kind of image. As Christianity took a hold, the devil got more evil as time went on, and Orcus became really evil and toasting forks and horns and fiery flames and purgatory and all this stuff. And Pluto wasn't known so much. Orcus became the main word, and Pluto. And he says it's like Orcus going above the ecliptic and Pluto dropping below the ecliptic. And anyway, I thought that was great, and I started to research Orcus, and I couldn't find what Mike Brown was talking about. What are you on about? Orcus is a Latin and therefore Roman, not Etruscan. The two things are different. Roman, Etrushka is further north. So I sent him an email, bless him, and said, Mike, where did you get this Etruscan thing from for Orcus? And he emailed me back, very honest. I mean, he's such an honest bloke. He said, oh, hi, Alison. I don't know. I can't remember. I got it from Google. So I thought, I'm talking to the great astronomer. So, nah. So I emailed a polite thing back, Google. And it came back, yeah, just did a generic Google search. I said, you named a planet after doing a generic search on Google? I mean, this man is supposed to have, he's got a PhD, for God's sake. How did he get that? Did he Google his dissertation? I mean, you're supposed to have references and backups and citations. I mean, the man's an academic. But anyway, so I then sent another email back, Mike, I think Orcus actually has a Latin derivation. It actually comes from so-and-so. And I sent all this to him with all my citations, footnoted and everything, because I'm an academic student. And he came back in this really laid-back Californian way. Wow, you mean it really? Wow, okay. You mean not Etruscan? I went, no. Oh, gee, thanks. And then 3 days later, the IAU has changed all the stuff to do with Etrushka on its thing. And Mike just sent this saying, thanks a lot for that. That's great. Wow, it takes an astrologer to write to an astronomer and say, I'm sorry, it's not Etruscan. So he reworded everything, and I've kept these emails for posterity because, boy, is that my proudest moment. Oh, dear. Right, I just want to go on now about Ixion, which is another Plutino and a TransNeptunian object, not a dwarf planet. This is going to be so confusing. The reason I'm mentioning Ixion in this talk is because he is important, even if he's not a dwarf planet, for the reasons which I will now go into. Ixion is the guy, as you can see from these images, who was attached to the wheel that wheels eternally through the heavens because he was naughty. Ixion did things that were wrong. His themes are piousness, hypocrisy, sinfulness, lust, and for this he gets punishment. He represents how human strivings for success and man's aspirations and ambitions are sinful. This is where the Catholic Church is really getting into its heyday with this sin thing. Ixion is human with human failings, which is kind of where I'm coming from and why I want to talk about him. Ixion was the subject of classical Greek mythology. His particular crime was lewdness and sensuality because he lusted after Hera. Hera was Zeus's wife, and these two were always getting into all kinds of shenanigans. He was going off with the goddesses, and she was always finding out and eating his babies. And if anybody turned their eyes to Hera, Zeus went berserk. I mean, that wasn't to be done at all, but he could have every goddess in the pantheon. That was no problem. Ixion is sharing dinner with them on Olympus, and he's lusting after Hera. And so Zeus gets so cross about this, he fashions a cloud to make it look like Hera. And when Ixion grabs his moment, leaps on top of Hera, he actually finishes up impregnating the cloud. You'd think he'd notice, wouldn't you? But never mind. Anyway, so strangely, that the resulting offspring, because of course in Greece they can have offspring between the copulation of a man and a cloud. It's Greece. The offspring was the father of the centaurs. So there you go. Anyway, Zeus was furious because Ixion's actions threatened the formal institution of friendship that ensured travelling Greeks could count on each other for safety. You're not supposed to want the wife of the man you're stopping with. It's not supposed to be there. Ixion's image became one of the most famous sinners on display in Tartarus. And this was certainly heavily reinforced in the Middle Ages, by which time he was bound to a fiery wheel, because fire became everything in the Catholic Church. The image of hellfire retribution that the Catholic Church has actually came from the volcanoes of Italy, because all of civilizations take their iconography, if you like, their symbolism from the images around them. You know, so the worst thing around you, if you're in Italy, and it's around 400 BC, AD, is volcanoes, because Italy's on a fault line, and at that point Italy was very active, and so there was many active volcanoes. And so, you know, burning hellfire images, well, that's, you know, the worst thing that the Catholic Church could imagine. And so that's what their image of hell came from. So that's, you see, you trace all these things back, and you think, oh, it's not that scary then, is it? Well, volcanoes are scary, but I mean, they're not exactly like the underworld. Well, I suppose, oh, never mind. Anyway, so what was interesting about Ixion also was he was the first to be discovered, if you like. He was, 2002, they were just starting out, and they came across Ixion, the first one. So I think that makes him quite important. I like looking at the headlines on the days that planets are discovered, because I think as they emerge into the collective, it's what is in the Zeitgeist at that point, you know, what is in the collective, what are the energies as these things are given birth to, you know, because that's important. So, the headlines on this particular day were quite interesting. There was a big thing about Catholic priests all jockeying for succession. They all wanted to become the new Pope. And then we've decided in England that we ain't having any more of this Catholic stuff, because we're just so fed up with the paedophile and the sex abuse thing, and we've just like had it with them. So we've actually, in England, we aren't religious anymore. We've stopped going to churches. We're flogging them off and turning them into flats. We're going spiritual, you know, we're staying spiritual, but we've had it with the Catholic Church. So you'll have to forgive me if I kind of offend anybody, but it's just been, oh dear. Anyway, another interesting headline concerning a divorce triangle actually was around when Ixion was discovered. And this is to do with you guys. Mayor Giuliani, if I said that right, of New York. Now, this was really cool, right? So his estranged wife would not move out, but had taken an injunction out to ban him bringing his girlfriend home I mean, this is a real Zeus Hera thing going on now, isn't it, you know? So Mr. Giuliani, Mayor Giuliani, was accused of being a hypocrite because he had presided over a morals and decency campaign and he got his girlfriend on the side. You've got something else going on about that at the moment, haven't you? Anyway, the thing about Ixion for me and his meaning in the Kuiper Belt is about his humanness. He's not perfect. In myth, he was the first one to commit a murder. So he murders, he lusts, he does the wrong thing, and he gets punished. And everything he does is so human. So for me, he's kind of like a metaphor for humanity out there in the Kuiper Belt. You know, I kind of see him as kind of like, you know, stumbling, fumbling, getting it all wrong, you know, but still, he's there. He's actually conjunct a classical Kuiper Belt object called Quawa until the middle of the 21st century, so it'll be too difficult to separate their meaning until then. We're not going to get anything at the moment because who knows which one's which. So, Quawa, by the way, was an indigenous deity of this area, wasn't he? Certainly around Los Angeles. It's not this area. I'm 1,000 miles away. 100 miles, not 1,000 miles. Anyway, the Tomba tribe of somewhere around Los Angeles, where they had their indigenous god was Quawa. Okay, so what we're going to do now then is we're going to look at the classical KBOs. Let's look at Maki Maki. Right. That is an image of Maki Maki that was carved on a rock on Easter Island. Maki Maki, as they used to say, was the indigenous god, the creator god of the Easter Islanders, or Rapai Nui, as it's called. There's Easter Island. So I feel a bit humble, actually, coming over to the Pacific Rim as an English person and talking to you about deities in the Pacific Rim. But what I do think, actually, and I'm really thrilled about this, I think it was great that Mike Brown broke the mold of naming planets after the centre of the universe, which is apparently Rome. I think it's absolutely marvellous that he said, no, enough of that stuff, we've had enough of the Roman stuff, let's just, you know, go out there and pick indigenous tribes from all over the world, mainly the Pacific Rim, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. And there's something symbolic in that, I think. It's the spiritual, going on about it again, moving from that spiritual monotheistic religion stuff around the Mediterranean into something much more encompassing and global, much more relaxed, less of this hell stuff, you know. I think that's quite interesting and great to see. So, the Polynesians. Oh, what a fantastic race. So they used to have these double-hulled canoes with sails and oars, and they used to put their children and their crops and their animals and their water in them, and then they would sail across 5,000 miles of Pacific Ocean with just the stars to navigate and the sea swells and the migrating animals. And they would find an island, Easter Island, 11 miles by 13 miles by 9 miles in the middle of that, using those navigational skills. Wow! I mean, they're astrologers, aren't they? Astronomers, astrologers. It's this gung-ho spirit that is quite important when it comes to the dwarf planets, and especially the dwarf planets in this classical position, the creational deities of the Kuiper Belt. There is an extremely gung-ho spirit. This energy is going to be fecund, it's going to have its way, it's going to emerge, it's going to create, it's going to move out no matter what. And I think that's quite an important thing for us to remember as we get towards the end of this talk, because I think we're going to need to understand that there is a driving force of this nature, you know, where you just sling all the kids in the back and get in the boat and start paddling out to the Pacific Ocean. Yay. There's so much in the book on Maki Maki, and I'm not going to go over it all. It's the biggest chapter in the book. It's an amazing story. I used to sit crying every night as I wrote it for these poor Easter Islanders. It was so horrible to them. Basically, they went from 30,000 to 111 in 20 years. They were exterminated. It was a terrible Holocaust. European introduced diseases, slave trading. It was just horrific. One of the interesting things that's come out about this island recently is it has a substance in the soil called rapamycin, and it's an absolute elixir to life. It boosts the immune system. Genuine. Google it. Like Mike Brown. Google. And it's rapamycin. How do you spell it? RAPAMYCIN. And the scientists are kind of like working on it. But the interesting thing about it, and I think Maki Maki his energy may be in this rapamycin. What used to happen is when they collected a whole load of the Easter Islanders, and they were lovely, friendly people, and they put them all in the hulls of the ship, threw them in, and set sail. They would die before they even reached the sugar plantations. But in their hundreds, they would die. And they were always puzzled by this. Let's blame the Dutch. It was the Dutch that were doing it. It wasn't the English, it was the Dutch. The Dutch were all like kidnapping them. And they were always amazed. And they said that the Easter Islanders were very big and strong, but quite fickle when they left the island. And they used to put this down to homesickness. It's probably the fact that the islanders' immune system is boosted by this rapamycin in the soil. And so when they got away from it, they died because they'd no longer got the support of the rapamycin. Very interesting to think about Maki Maki in that light, really. Those, by the way, the Moai, they are not Maki Maki. There was never any intention that they should represent Maki Maki. They represent the ancestors. There's a like little short guy at the end and a big guy next to him. So these were all quarried from a volcano quarry on the island. And they're massive. They're 270 tons, you know. These things are like enormous. They don't look so big there, but they are really big. And they carved them with little tiny stone picks, right? They carved them lying flat. So they carved the face and everything, and then they chipped away underneath, and then they chip, and then they lifted them up, and then they used to walk them across the island. And they put them on all the coasts, and they sat all along the coast with their backs to the sea. And that is quite amazing. Why did they do this? They put the bones of the ancestors in the platforms underneath, and then, of course, the spirit of the ancestor would stay in this wonderful stone image. And I think it likely, and none of the experts on Easter Island are ever going to agree with me on this one, but you get a nose as an astrologer. You get to kind of like feel, you can sense. And I think that they were meant to protect the islanders from the tsunamis, because this is a volcanic region. Easter Island is a volcano. There are big volcanoes in that area and tsunamis. And there was this big mystery thing about why the islanders one day stopped carving. One day they put their picks down and they never went back. And there was some evidence of earthquake. Some of these things were toppled and broken. And I think it may be, for instance, that there was a tsunami and simply swept over the island. You know, that would explain why there weren't that many there the next day. Certainly Maki Maki has got something to do with earthquakes and tsunamis, as we'll see later. That's the glyph that I'm suggesting for Maki Maki. You'll see why in a moment. Right, on the right-hand side, we've got a rock carving of the image of Maki Maki, which became a mask. And the island has had absolutely amazing sense of humour, because you're all looking very straight-faced at this male genitalia in front of you. Because what they did was they turned the man's genitalia the wrong way around. The nose is a penis. And I just think that's so cool. The islanders just had this bawdy thing about Maki Maki, you know, whoa, give it him. And he used to kind of like, they saw him as kind of like increasing their virility. It's a very creational energy. Mike Brown's wife was having a baby and was pregnant when he discovered these particular planets. And he was filled with this energy and male pride at his fathering a child. And he explains how he used to lie in bed at night with his hand on his wife's belly, feeling his baby move, and it used to fill him with pride. And there's something so life-giving. You get a huge sense about the creation of life, and you cannot hold it back. Life will go on no matter what. And Maki Maki would ensure it did. And I think that's great. So I've obviously taken the double circle of spirit, because there's a duality, and put in the kind of like the Mars type of, the arrow there. And also, I mean, I've just taken it from his mask, I think that's a great glyph. This has been approved in England, but we'll have to see what... it's gone to Solar Fire, and it may be included in version 8. So if you buy version 8 of Solar Fire, you may get offered that as an alternative glyph. But they had already picked one that an Australian had done. So, well, naturally, it's their area, isn't it? So there's a lovely... This was painted by the... Captain Cook's expedition, who went to Easter Island, and he took with him artists and scientists, and they painted that. And you can't see the detail too clearly. But what you've got there is sailors and the islanders and the women. The women were very sexually free. They were quite happy to entertain the sailors. And you've got a little guy over in the corner, I don't know if you can see that, who's about to steal that hat. They were great thieves. They loved stealing hats, wood and cloth. They never went for the rifles. They never attempted to take any weapons. They never fought back. They were gunned down in their thousands, or hundreds at least. And they were just they were peaceful people, but they could also be very competitive. They liked to be competitive, and they were great at stealing. And they had codes around stealing and pilfering. Right. This is not in the book. This is stuff I've done since. We had a Uranus opposition to Maki Maki from the 12th of April 2009 to the 24th of January 2011. So put that up yourself and have a look at it. I think there was altogether 5 hits. What came up as I was watching this were themes that kept coming back with each hit, with each exactment. And I was stripping out the Uranus stuff, which we kind of know, and looking at what was left, and I was getting some clear themes coming through. I also noted when the Sun got in there at 90, or a conjunct or opposition, and Mars, and that would kind of like bring it up as well, as these things happen normally. So issues, stuff that came up was obviously synchronous with Maki Maki, was seafaring, piracy and kidnapping. We kept getting the Somali issue coming up. You had a captain who, the Merce Alabama big ship, and the American captain who got kidnapped and everything. All that came up during one of these exact oppositions. So that's a definite one. Recognition of indigenous races and their plights. This brought up the whole Somali issue, this indigenous race which is suffering. Population controls, pandemic disease, virus spread, virus containment, vaccines for virus, and viral nature things. This is all Maki Maki's stuff. It's there in his roots because his people were killed by viruses, European spread viruses. But the swine flu thing, it was just spot on. Every time we had that exactment, the swine flu issue was big in England. And it was hilarious. Our government made loads of vaccinations for the swine flu, but then it went around the English people. It wasn't to be trusted because they'd done it too fast, and so nobody wanted the vaccination. Saturn came along, got into the mix, got in front of Maki Maki, and on the day that he did, the virus stopped spreading. And this is what happens with these guys. You can see real stuff happening as you get Saturn coming in. It's wonderful. But anyway, so that was it. No more swine flu. Nobody caught it again. So the government then is stuck with all these immunisation, all these vaccination things. So I had to laugh when it became, one of our newspapers then revealed to a stunned England that the government had replaced the usual seasonal flu jab for vulnerable people in October. They'd replaced it with this swine flu jab, and they were giving all the elderly this swine flu jab because they wanted to use it up. And that all came out with Maki Maki as well. And there was a big scandal, and health services got to go. And sea change in spiritual beliefs in the UK. We're having a sea change in spiritual beliefs anyway. In the UK, the Catholic priest paedophile sex abuse scandal has really been running with the Makemake Uranus opposition. Every time we get the exact hit, there's another big stuff going on about it. Druidry was accepted as a religion in England on one of the hits, officially accepted. And we've just had a census, and we were able to tick Druidry on our census as our religion, so that was really great. Druidry, astrologer. One day. Tsunamis and earthquakes, definitely Make's thing. Now, you're not going to be able to see this. All I was explaining to you as astrologers, if you want to get Makemake on your charts, you can't get them in main body on solar fire. You can get them as extra ring points. So there's Makemake at 26 of Virgo, Haumea at 17 of Libra, Orcus at 0, we'll call it 01 of Virgo, Ixion at 17 Sag, Quawa at 21 Sag. Oh, that's chaos down there. We're not talking about chaos. When I did this, actually, yeah, Uranus is at 25 of Pisces there, so opposite Makemake at 26 of Virgo. Now, I'll just give you the chart data on this, and you can put the charts up for yourself, because we haven't. I did this talk for a 3-hour thing, and we haven't got 3 hours, so I'm going to cut this bit out. You can look at it at home. This is the earthquake at Chile. The Chile chart I'm using is the 1818 one, and the earthquake details are 27th of February 2010. You do your dates the other way around, but and 0334 ADT, Chilan, Chile is the chart I've used there. And what's interesting for me about this is Uranus is exactly conjunct Chile's Pluto, and Makemake down here, which you can't see because you can't put an extra ring point on a bi-wheel, is opposing the Pluto. So you've got a Uranus-Makemake opposition on top of Chile's Pluto, which I thought was quite interesting. The reason I find that interesting is because Pluto is the receiving planet, and the way I do my astrology is if I want to know what area of a person's life is going to be affected by the transit, what I do is I take the transited planet, which naturally rules a zodiac sign, so Scorpio, and then I go to the house cusp where Scorpio appears, and for me, that's where the action will happen, the 4th house. So for me, the earthquake down there in the IC in the roots of Chile, that made complete sense to me. You know, like whoa, of course, you know. You've got some other stuff in the chart as well, because actually Uranus and Makemake are also squaring the Neptune Uranus conjunction there as well, but I'll just leave you to have a look at that chart. If you put the dwarf planets into your chart, especially big events like this, you just start to get, it just goes richer. You just get so much more stuff, you know, it's really cool. Japan's earthquake. The thing that's interesting here, this is the 1889 Japan chart. And the details I've used are 11th of March 2011, 1446, Honshu. Okay, so transiting Uranus is squaring Japan's Jupiter, transiting Neptune is squaring himself, transiting Pluto is squaring Venus and opposing Chiron, Chiron is squaring Pluto, transiting nodes are conjunct the Moon, Sedna is squaring the Sun and trining the nodes, Eris is opposing Uranus and squaring the nodes. There's a lot of nodal activity in that chart. We took that as being quite a karmic thing. Right, we'll move on. Right, Haumea, must get into Haumea. So, a Hawaiian goddess of creation, Haumea. Absolutely amazing and wonderful and fantastic that Mike Brown picked Haumea from Hawaii. And do you know the amazing thing about this, because you've got a Hawaiian president, when Obama started to go for selection was when Haumea got discovered. And then when Haumea was named, Obama won. And I always think that's amazing, because he was born in Hawaii, wasn't he? So synchronous. The great thing about Haumea, the dwarf planet, for me, is that she has this amazing story about how she was discovered. Mike Brown had discovered her, and he was making all the right observations and stuff, so when he registered her as a planet, he would instantly be able to have a press conference and give everybody the details. But his wife went into labour. So he didn't register the planet. He went off and played Happy Daddy. And at that time, a Spanish team of astronomers, headed by Jose Luis, I can't remember his name, can Google it, he did discover Haumea and quickly registered his discovery with the IAU. This meant that because he had registered Haumea first, he got to be the discoverer. Mike Brown had a fit, came back off parental leave, and quickly called a press conference and called Jose Luis a hacker without scruples, accusing him of stealing all his data. Oh. So then they had a meeting, and I think Mike Brown punched Jose Luis on the nose, or Jose Luis punched Mike Brown on the nose. I mean, it's just incredible. You know, these are astronomers, you know, like brawling, like over this. But the IAU said this was the worst controversy they'd had for 400 years. They couldn't sort it out. And so then they did something amazing. They said, right, on the official documentation and on the website, we will not put the name of any discoverer. Now, this is fascinating, because this means Haumea is not owned or discovered by a man. She is the only planet to have no discoverer. And I just think this is something symbolic about how Haumea cannot be owned by a man. If Haumea is Mother Nature, and she is not owned by a man. They can squabble all they like over her, but they can't have her. And I think that's a really lovely story. The name was chosen because Mike Brown wanted to break free of the tradition of European deities. Haumea is the goddess of childbirth, and Mike Brown's wife was pregnant. She is the goddess of molten and solid rock, and the planet itself is made of solid rock. The 2 moons around the planet were discovered from the telescope on Hawaii. And in myth, Haumea has offspring that are formed from pieces of her body. So she gives birth by pulling pieces of her body off. And the planet itself is actually in a family that were formed when 2 planets collided together in a graze and merge situation. So not a violent one especially, some bits flew off. But this has meant that the planet Haumea is actually cylindrical shaped and spins over and over, end over end, in 4 hours. Oh, that's amazing. That's fast. Imagine being on that. Whee! And she has a red spot on one side of her. When she was originally discovered, Mike Brown called her Santa, because she was discovered on Boxing Day. I think that's neat that she's got this red spot like Santa's hat. Oh. So, and there's a lovely image there of Haumea drawn by a Hawaiian lady. Now, there's something else that I think is absolutely so important about this. And that is that NASA has identified Haumea as being the outpost for mankind when we leave the solar system. And there is a reason for this. Because Haumea has water ice. And the one thing they're not going to be able to take with them in the rocket when it takes off from NASA, like, you know, this gung-ho spirit, you know, like they put all their crops and their children and everything in those double-hull canoes, you know, and they just set off with just the the stars to guide them, travelling across thousands of miles of sea, that we've got something here of the image of us setting off in this space rocket and just heading out. We need somewhere to land to set up a base. And the interesting thing when you think about it is past the asteroid belt, they're all gas, right? So we can't go and land on Jupiter. So we've got all the gas giants. So the asteroid belt is rocky, everything in between is gas, and then we come to the Kuiper Belt, which is rocky again. So as a human race, when we decide to colonize the rest of the universe, we have identified that Haumea is the place that we will go and set up camp. So I just think that's absolutely amazing in terms of, oh wow, that is just so amazing. So way in the future, it's another planet to live on. And I just get this intrepid gung-ho feeling again, there we go. Oh, going out there. Haumea represents creation. This ever-evolving feminine principle that is born out of itself. Hawaii is formed as the lava spews out of the volcanoes, then cools and adds to the landmass. The fire within the volcano is Haumea in her fire goddess form called Pele, and Haumea is also the rock. So she's Mother Nature transformed into anything. She morphs from an old woman to a young girl in her myth. She represents both the wild food and agriculture. And I've got a lovely quote there from a Hawaiian cultural historian who says, "The Hawaiian culture evolved in close partnership with its natural environment. Thus, Hawaiian culture does not have a clear dividing line of where culture ends and nature begins. In a traditional Hawaiian context, nature and culture are one and the same, and there is no division between the two. This is this wonderful spiritual concept that I believe these planets represent and we are going towards as we pull away from Rome." And I think that's just lovely. I'm doing a talk on Sunday while I'm here at the New Renaissance bookshop, and it's the content of it is entirely different to this. I've just decided it's a New Age talk, but it's about the dwarf planets, but it's for anybody who's not an astrologer, but astrologers can understand it, and astrologers would, I think, love it. But I talk a lot in it about the scientific aspects of dark matter, dark energy, and the synchronicity with the underworld and stuff like this. But basically, the underworld for me is dark matter and dark energy, scientific discovery. And it was really cool then to discover that the last Queen of Hawaii said the following in 1940. "Behind the legend is the Polynesian mythical conception of a dark, formless spirit world presided over by the female element, and a world of form born out of the spirit world and to which it again returns, made visible and active in this human life through light as the impregnating male element." And that's what she says of Haumea, and I think that is just it's marvellous. It's just amazing. Just to write that in 1940, and then we find out that that is exactly at the dark, formless world of dark energy, dark matter. Charles Darwin. Right, while I was doing the research for this, I was so aware of Haumea's evolutionary aspects. Something would be aspecting her in the transits, and then there'd be something on about, discovering a baby dinosaur skeleton. And I thought, there's got to be something in this origin species stuff. Charles Darwin. So I got Charles Darwin's chart out. Oh, well, guess what I found? Charles Darwin's moon is at 21 degrees in the second house in Capricorn, and his Haumea is at 18 degrees of Capricorn. So there's just 3 degrees between his moon and Haumea. So that I thought that was fantastic. Charles Darwin, of course, is the 19th century English naturalist whose book, The Origin of Species, was revolutionary. I mean, like, everything else is a footnote to that. And his theory that all things have evolved from common ancestry has remained a central axiom of human evolutionary understanding ever since, unchallenged really. However, then it went on then, because as I started to read his website, I read about this guy called Alfred Wallace, who during the 19th century was Darwin's co-discoverer. We never hear of this Alfred Wallace, we always hear of Darwin. This Alfred Wallace promoted the theory that natural selection is this primary mechanism of evolutionary change, supposedly, according to this website, even more vigorously than Darwin. Okay, Alfred Wallace's chart. And Wallace's horoscope has Haumea at 7 degrees of Aquarius conjunct his Mars at 4 degrees of Aquarius. So the term vigorous is quite apt, really, isn't it? Much more visibly. So she has strong associations, Haumea, with evolution, and transits to her invoke such things as evolutionary stuff and all the rest of it. Like Maki Maki, she represents ethnic and minority races. The rocky composition of the planet has a strong earth element, so you kind of like the unearth element when you're talking about her. She's very fundamental to matters of creation. This, you're going to love this. Oh, you're so going to love this. Right, so this is the moment the drill broke through to the cavern where the Chilean miners were trapped. So the date is the 9th of October, and Haumea is at 1659, call it 17 degrees of Libra. And at the moment that the drill broke through, the sun went to 1615, so within 1 degree orb of Haumea. Haumea, rock, right? People trapped underground in the rock, Haumea's world. So the drill bit breaks through the sunlight, not literally, I don't suppose they could see the sun, but like it's the breakthrough, isn't it? It's they're alive, there was so much joy, this is fantastic, now we just have to figure out how to get them out, but anyway, they're alive. But what was brilliant then was Mercury in this chart is at 10 degrees of Libra. So what happened was on the 13th of October, so the drill broke through on the 9th, on the 13th of October, they began the rescue mission. And this is what is incredibly cool, right? So what they're doing then, as Mercury conjuncts Haumea exactly, they are putting these men in that little tube thing, and they are making their journey, Mercury, messenger to the underworld, the only god of the Greek underworld who could go in and out of the underworld. So they're putting these men in this little tube shaped like Haumea and pulling them up through the rock, where it was quoted by the Chilean Prime Minister, it was as if they were being reborn, Haumea giving birth. So it's like Mercury goes conjunct Haumea, and the god that goes down into the underworld and brings the souls back from the underworld. Isn't that absolutely amazing astrology? It is, it's beautiful. It makes your hair all stand on end. It's just absolutely lovely. That narrow drill hole, that capsule, I wouldn't, oh God, claustrophobia. I think I'd have said, no, leave me down here. Amazing. So, such a wonderful thing. So, it's so good. Right, and so now we're going to look at the scattered disk, a quick look at the scattered disk object of Eris. When she was first discovered, Eris was originally thought to be bigger than Pluto, and that finally put the coffin lid on it for Pluto, really. At that point it was, look, we've got a planet even bigger than Pluto now. For heaven's sake, it's about time we said Pluto is a Kuiper Belt object. This is ridiculous saying that he's a classical planet, and it started that big row. I was very interested, actually, in what happened with that row about Pluto, because so here we're in big transition in evolution in our conception of what the solar system planets are all about and whether or not Pluto's a classical planet. And for me, it was just amazing because we had people doing the very thing that people do when they are being Plutoed, you know. Some accept the transformation easily and give great, you know, this is fantastic. Pluto's got this new place and all these new mates. That's brilliant, great. And then there's others who want to cling to the past and nothing must change. You know, the client with the Pluto transit that definitely is not going to accept any change whatsoever. And you think, oh, well, you're so going to have to. So it's just, you can just see how the effect that this Pluto thing was having on people was quite, you know. And then you've got all these people like, save Pluto, you know. I will not have my Pluto transit. So I'm going to move the planet.
Why are you calling it scattered disk?
The astronomers have called it scattered disk, not me. I wish I was that important. It would be great, wouldn't it? Eris takes 560 years to go around the sun. That's a big cycle. Some keywords for Eris. Well, Eris was first called Xena. There's Eris, the planet. Well, an artist's conception, because of course they're too far away for us to have any conception of what they really look like. So that's an artist's image. Eris was first called Xena, a nickname that Mike Brown gave the planet. And I was lucky enough to be at a boot sale and found an old video of Xena, the princess warrior. And so I was able to get this from the script on the back. In a time of ancient gods, warlords and kings, a mighty princess is forged in the heat of battle. Her name is Xena, and only her courage and passion can restore order to a world in turmoil, a world crying out for a hero. Yes! Titanic, iceberg, other way, separate them. Fantastic. We so need this feisty, furious, fighting energy. She's the goddess of strife, stimulation and rivalry. She's got a terrible reputation in Greece. I have to be honest and tell you that it's not good. However, you have to be able to know how to handle Eris. If you can just get a handle on her, she's actually an incredibly helpful energy to have around. I'll just tell you this really cool astrological detail about this name. Mike Brown chose the name Dysnomia for Eris's moon. Dysnomia is the Greek goddess of lawlessness, right? Xena was, the actress who played Xena was Lucy Lawless. And it gets better. Lucy Lawless's chart is her sun, moon, Saturn, North Node are all in Aries in the first house, conjunct Eris.
Wow.
Absolutely fantastic. And Lucy Lawless is quoted as saying, I loved playing Xena because I could be as psycho as I wanted to be. With that lot in the first house in Aries, yeah, psycho is a very good word. Yeah. I'm not going to argue with you. You can say what you like. Libra ascendant backs off. Anyway, so and we're told that Eris is the goddess of discord, fighting, and quarrelling. I like the take on Eris that one of the Greek writers has, Hesiod, because he gives some very kind of wise and sage advice when it comes to Eris. He talks about the fact that when Eris is abundant in our lives, we can get extremely irate and angry because somebody else appears to have something that they shouldn't have. It's unfair. We don't think that they should have it, and we can get all screwed up about being jealous and wanting to get our own back, retribution. And this can kind of like derail us, really. And what he's saying, this Hesiod, is that you just need to get on with your own stuff, increase your own toils, increase your own labour, stay focused on your own thing, and like the tortoise and the hare myth, you will outpace the other person eventually. That's what he's saying. Now, as kind of something to bring up about this, I think you guys had the same thing here, but in England we were absolutely outraged because what happened was behind our backs, our banks went and lent money to people who couldn't pay their mortgages somewhere else, and then were on the point of collapse, and then the British taxpayer had to bail them out with trillions of pounds or other because these banks were going to go bust. Well, let them. No, said Gordon Brown, we're going to save them. Oh, joy. So, unbelievable. So we go through all that, and then the next thing we know is we've got an austerity package, and we're all not going to have jobs for several million years, and it's all going to be terrible, and there's another depression. And then what happens is we find out the damn bankers, right, are still getting their bonuses of £1 million, and yet apparently we're going to finance them every time they fail. Oh my! So we were so angry. So everybody, like, you can't be a banker now in England because somebody will leap on your chest and bang your head up and down on the floor. It's like, you'd be better off actually saying you're an astrologer than saying you're a banker, and that's saying something. Oh dear. So all this was going off, and then we also decided to have a go at our MPs. We were furious with our MPs because we found out they'd been fiddling their expenses, and they'd been charging us like, maybe £100 too much a year or something, but never mind, we were in the mood, so we all went after them then, and the MPs were being prosecuted for putting in expenses for, oh dear, amazing. And you can just get this sense of Eris when all this is happening, because she's known for causing turmoil and all kinds of difficulties, and I've got a list of the stuff that she gave birth to, which means she produces. And of course the Greeks called these things gods and goddesses. So gods and goddesses, such things as trouble, toil, oblivion, hunger, pain, murder, carnage, brawls, disputes, ruin, forgetfulness, deceit, and finally, lawlessness. So that's a hell of a package there. What Eris does, and this is the key to understanding her, is that she routes out or tends to bring to the surface something that you should have sorted out anyway, and you didn't sort out. And then when the wheel drops off and it all goes boswonks because you didn't sort it out, you're getting all irate and angry about it, and kind of like, and then you go all derailed because you're focusing on something that, that's just taking all your attention. I mean, maybe we should have noticed what our blooming banks were doing behind our backs. I mean, we had a financial authority that was supposed to watch over these banks, right? Well, they were looking the other way. They were being taken out to dinner by these banks, and they never even went and looked at their bank balances. They never even checked out what was happening. So, that was somebody's fault for not checking that. Eris energy is sort of like, so say that you've got a computer and you don't do your updates, and then, your computer gets a virus, and you can get all outraged and angry. This damn computer's going back to the shop. Well, it was your fault because you were supposed to do your updates, And so with Eris, it's about how she will cause trouble when something that should have been sorted out wasn't sorted out. And I think, astrologically, she's actually at 22 degrees of Aries at the moment, so she's back on my descendant. So I'm quickly getting to know her. You do really, having had a couple of dealings with her already, the outraged person heads towards me, I think it is definitely about just do your own thing. Don't get all angry and irate about what they're doing over there. Yes, you feel absolutely that you should, but if you can, just kind of like focus on your own, and you do definitely get a leg up. She will give you that leg up if you just kind of like stop wanting to bang their head up and down on the floor. It says in myth that she delights in the tumult of war. She stays on the battlefield rejoicing in the havoc when the other gods have withdrawn. It's this movement and excitability that is Eris's delight. The chaos is exhilarating for her, and she feels elation in the mayhem. So, what a girl. She's part of the natural system of justice. So you can kind of leave Eris to and expect that it'll get sorted out because Eris will sort it out. You don't need to take any direct retribution yourself. Eris will definitely sort the job out. You can turn away, it'll be fine. Right, Sedna. This is good, we're going to be on time. Right, Sedna is an outraged Arctic goddess. Now, Sedna is a goddess from the Inuit or the Eskimo tribes of northern Canada and Alaska. Her myth is about how she was married to a bird, a seabird. It was awful. She was fed cold fish and she was cold and hungry. She cries for her dad to come and pick her up in a kayak and get her away. He comes and picks her up. They're paddling away. The bird, the big fulmar, creates a huge storm. This is important. And the boat is tossing around and it appears that they're going to die as they get thrown over. So in order to save himself, the father throws Sedna into the sea, thinking, well, if I get rid of her, then the husband, the bird, will leave me alone. So Sedna then clings to the side of the boat, and in order to get rid of her, her father cuts her fingers off, so she can't cling to the side of the boat. It's gruesome. And then as these fingers descend, fall through the ocean, they become the sea mammals and the whales and the dolphins. And Sedna then becomes the goddess of the underworld, of the Inuit goddess. And the shaman, so she's very much about shamanism and shamans. The Inuit shaman has to go down and he has to comb her hair because she hasn't got any fingers, so she can't comb her own hair. And that's about it. So she's an outraged Arctic goddess, and she's very stroppy. And she withholds the food for the Inuit tribe if they do not do the right thing with their food, if they don't honour the kill as they kill it, if they kill unnecessarily, she will withhold the food. And so she teaches the Eskimos about good husbandry skills, good parenting skills, cut your fingers off, about good husbandry skills. We're not going to have time for this chart, but what I'm just going to tell you about that, this is the floods in Pakistan in July 2010. And what was happening was we got Pakistan's progressed sun is at 22 degrees of Libra, and it's opposite the natal Sedna, and at that time transiting Eris was conjunct the natal Sedna and opposing the sun, so kind of bringing some energy into that. And also across the ascendant-descendant axis, you've got the Uranus-Maki Maki opposition going ahead. So it's quite an interesting chart to see the stuff that happened in Pakistan during that period. Is very nicely described by the dwarf planets and Sedna. Now I've put there Sedna takes between 10,500 years to 12,000 years to go around the sun because they can't make their flipping minds up. I mean, this is a Google thing, right? So you can go to Wikipedia or Google and you can find 10,500 years for sure, and then just as I came away I saw somebody change the Wikipedia to 11,400 years. So it's a big orbit. What you've got there, the yellow thing in the middle is supposed to be the sun. The green stuff around the outside of that gizmo, that's the entire solar system. The purple thing is Eris, and the blue one is Sedna's orbit. And that's where she is now. And so Sedna introduces, when Mike Brown named her, he said he was so conscious of the fact that this planet went all the way out, nearly, halfway to the next star, where she went out into the frigid, cold wastelands of the interstellar space. And so he got this sense of, this cold, frigid goddess, the Arctic, cold, frigid. So he kind of named her after that, really. She introduces for us the concept of just massive cycles of time. We've really got to get our head round of the fact that the solar system is much bigger than we thought, that our whole universe is much bigger than we thought. We've got to get really stretch out now and start to see much bigger stuff. So, interesting for me was the fact, because Plato wrote about the island of Atlantis If Plato said it, then I believe it, and because I love Plato, and we have discovered, we think, where Atlantis may have been. This is Spain and Morocco, so here you've got the Straits of Gibraltar, and we've discovered a sunken island there called Spartel Island, which there's lots of evidence that it may well be the fabled Atlantis that fell in a tsunami and huge earthquake. Okay. So, underneath, we've got an artist's impression of the beautiful island of Atlantis. What I'm making a comparison about is that Sedna is in the same position now in transit that she was in when Atlantis fell. And we've got the Japanese disaster. And there, of course, is one of the images of where there used to be a city. And a whole city went. So Atlantis, the Easter Island thing, you know, with the tsunami and the earthquake that toppled the Moai, and all the people disappeared instantly. They were working on those Moai, and suddenly the whole production line stopped and nobody went back, which must have happened in the 1600s. And the Japan thing, I think there's something about Sedna's position now and stuff that's coming up. Earth gets an ice age every 100,000 years, fact. Right? And I listen to the arguments about man-made global warming. And well, it doesn't matter for me if it goes either way. It doesn't matter who's causing it. I just know it's happening. And the astrology with the dwarf planets describes the times ahead and describes what is happening. And whether or not it's man-made or man-assisted, or whether it's just happening anyway, it's neither here nor there, because we just need to say that the astrology is describing something to do with great cycles. And here is a big cycle. Now, I've got some stuff to read you. This is from a report from your own Office of Public Affairs, Santa Barbara, and I'm just going to read you what it says. It is known that Earth's orbit around the Sun changes shape every 100,000 years. The orbit becomes either more round or more elliptical at these intervals. The shape of the orbit is known as its eccentricity. A related aspect is the 41,000-year cycle in the tilt of the Earth's axis. This is aside from precession. I know precession is 26-odd thousand years. We have more cycles going on than just precession. Glaciation of the Earth also occurs every 100,000 years. This scientist, that lady there, found that the timing of changes in climate and eccentricity coincided. The clear correlation between this is a quote, the clear correlation between the timing of the change in orbit and the change in the Earth's climate is strong evidence of a link between the two, says the scientist. It is unlikely that these events would not be related to one another. So my point is that this is an issue, and it has been since the discovery of the dwarf planets around 2004 when we started to hear about them. If we go back, you won't remember, but if we go back to 2003, the issue of climate change, or global warming as it was called then, this was a fringe issue for people who smoked joss sticks, wore kaftans and went peace man. These were fringe people. What's happened is very quickly this has moved on to the world stage and in mainstream news. I mean, we can't remember a time when we weren't serious about it, but we honestly didn't care about it a few years ago. It didn't matter. What we need to do is prepare for a future where the climate is going to change, and we just have to accept that. Processes, I'm going back to this planetary change thing again now. Remember I was talking about processes at the beginning of the talk, and I said about the process of the asteroid belt and the human person. Well, now I'm talking about processes of the planet and these big cycles of time and the Earth's axis in relation to its revolution around the sun. These are the issues that are coming up. I mean, you probably know already that when we had the Japanese earthquake, the Earth's axis shifted 7 centimeters. Now, we've yet to see how that manifests. But what we do see is we're getting some really strange weather. So in England, we had a heat wave in April. Now, if any of you have ever been to England, we do not get heat waves hardly ever. We just don't even get them in August. I mean, England has this kind of a standard temperature, which is 68, 70 degrees. If it goes 2 degrees either way, the English can't cope. We immediately don't go to work. We haven't got any snow ploughs. Our airports are all closed. The schools close instantly, which just sends mothers crazy, because if you can't send your kids to school, you'll definitely go crazy. If it's a heat wave, our reservoirs instantly just dissolve overnight. You know, we don't have water the moment we have hot weather. And so we have this very pathetic infrastructure supporting us. So we had a heat wave in April. And now, apparently, while I'm here, they have driving rain, 40-mile gales, and we are losing the crops in the fields. They were dehydrated before, now they're drowned. Ceres needs to help. And here is this amazing fact. 4 of the top 10 megaquakes of the last 100 years occurred in the last 7. That is amazing, isn't it? What we've got there is Sichuan in China in 2008, Sendai in Japan 2011, the Boxing Day Sumatra Indonesian one in 2004, and the Chilean one in February 2010. Now, I've taken this from New Scientist, but also I went to the USGS website as well to check out, and that is correct. And I think that the dwarf planets, with their background, with their mythology, with the stuff that I'm learning about them, are going to be symbols of this in the future. And so we need to look at this Kuiper Belt as being representative of all the things I said, but look at it's a process, the planetary process of this cycle we're in. You know, Sedna talks to us of big cycles. We kind of have to get our heads around that. The sun affects Earth weather. UV rays from the sun heat the stratosphere at its closest point, setting up a temperature gradient and generating stratospheric winds. UV rays hit the stratosphere, and that heated equatorial stratosphere, and that has a knock-on effect down through the troposphere, and that then affects the original path of the jet streams. And this is what's happening. This is the important stuff. If we go back just 2 or 3 years, our weathermen would not accept that the sun affected Earth's weather. They categorically refuted it. Now they understand that it absolutely does. And this is part of the scientific explosion of discovery that we're making. It's a funny fact. The more we discover of the separate bits of all the solar system with our electronic gizmos and stuff, the more we discover how very connected it is. So what's happening then? This is affecting the global hydrological pattern. Enter Sedna, right? Huge global movements of water are to do with her. And what happens is, if the way that the sun's rays hits the Earth, if you alter that angle slightly, and 7 centimeters is enough, then what happens is you get a different hydrological cycle going on. The winds press down on the Earth's oceans, and they push it against the mass of the land, and they cause pinching things to happen, which dives under, and you get massive ocean currents called conveyor belts, which is happening in the ocean and the ocean's currents. These are all being affected, and then they're in turn causing El Nino, La Nina weather events to happen, and that finishes up to be rain in England for some reason, which it does anyway. And so what's happening is we're getting all sorts of big changes. Now, we're actually going into a solar maximum, I'm sure you've all heard, and so this will be interesting because we've got so many more satellites in the sky now than we had during the last solar maximum, and solar maximums affect all the electromagnetic energy around the Earth, around Earth's atmosphere, and we get big eruptions on the sun and they knock satellites out. Satellites now control all our electrical transmission systems. While we weren't looking, they didn't just connect the banks up, they went and connected up all the power supply around the planet. We found out in England that most of our power now comes from France. How did they do that? They did it when we weren't looking. They did underground things, and oh God, now we've got to disconnect from France again. Who connected us up to France? We know we don't want to be connected. Anyway, so all sorts of stuff, and they're just going to have to sort this out because... Anyway, so it is likely that the gods of ancient times who could be called on to assist with the weather were and still are the El Niño, the La Niña, the jet streams, and the massive ocean currents. Now, Maki Maki, Haumea, Sedna, these were all gods to their indigenous races of weather. They would be prayed to and called upon to assist with rainfall so that people could grow crops. They would be called upon to assist in extremes of weather. They would be called upon to assist in times of tsunami, earthquakes. So these Haumea and Maki Maki were to their indigenous races the very energies that are provided by this El Niño, La Niña, jet streams and massive ocean current stuff. Maki Maki and Haumea and Sedna are these things. They were to those people, they just didn't know about the kind of science behind it. Now we've got the science behind it. So this is how important the Kuiper Belt and these dwarf planets are to us now. So what keeps happening is apparently that these jet streams keep kinking because of the solar activity that's going on. So we're getting massive blocks, and so then one country gets a deluge and another one gets parched. Oh dear, we need to sort this out. We're not going to be able to sort it out. What we need to do is sort out our survival in this. That's what we need to sort out. I mean, there's no point in going, oh, let's stop the, like King Canute, let's stop the water advancing up the beach. That's going to happen anyway. So it's like a Pluto transit. This is happening anyway. So what you have to do is you just have to devise and develop ways of coping with it, of dealing with the transformation. I mean, at the end of the day, Pluto's energy is about riches and transformation. The phoenix rises out of the ashes. This is about rebirth as much as this is about change. So we just need to, think positively. The dwarf planets, or the TNOs, represent duality and hidden power. The duality is about such things as what's underneath, what's behind. So we find out now that the jet streams are being affected by the sun, You look deeper and find out more. This is what you get with these dwarf planets. When Thor Heyerdahl went to Easter Island in the 50s, he discovered an island where on the surface they had Christianity and reed huts. And underneath at night they went into caves, a labyrinth of caves under the island, where they carried out cannibalism. It was like a Harry Potter world of sorcery and magic. And they had two lives. And you get this a lot with the dwarf planets. Look underneath and you'll find a whole pile of other stuff. There's a duality that goes on with them. Planetary processes, change, weather events, creation and evolution are all to do with them. So we're in a creational process. It's an evolutionary process. Natural resources and food husbandry come under them because as the planet goes through this process, then our crops and our food are being affected. Enter Ceres, really. Ceres was introduced into Rome to help deal with a drought. That's why she was called in. Extreme change and transformation. Well, you just got to look at Pluto and you kind of get the idea. Spiritual changes and growth are to do with these guys. and scientific discovery of the underworld. This is all stuff I'm talking about on Sunday. So there we have it, and I think that, that's the last slide. And I hope that that's been a good introduction to the dwarf planets for you. I'm hoping that, that's been great, and thank you for coming. And